Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, my dear listeners, to another edition of Sweet Story on your favorite channel. Today, we bring you a powerful, unfiltered message that has sent ripples across the international stage. It's a message of defiance, a call for justice, and a rallying cry for an entire continent. We're talking about the stirring address delivered by Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, a speech that has resonated deeply within Africa and beyond. He speaks not with the polished tones of a diplomat, but with the raw, visceral voice of a man from the battlefield, a voice rooted in what he calls centuries of African pain and now African awakening. Captain Traoré's address to the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, was nothing short of a reckoning. He began with a stark declaration, stating, and I quote, "There comes a moment in the life of a nation when silence is betrayal, when continued obedience is suicide, and when bowing to the same hands that choke you is no longer diplomacy, it is surrender." These are not mere words, my friends. They are a gauntlet thrown down, a clear signal that the old order is being challenged. He positions himself as a voice for a nation long been treated like a debtor's prison, and his tone was far from one of supplication. He declared, "I speak directly to the International Monetary Fund, not with trembling hands, but with a voice rooted in centuries of African pain and now African awakening." He didn't hold back in his critique of the IMF, dismantling its perceived role as a benevolent doctor. He asserted, "For too long, the IMF has posed as a benevolent doctor prescribing economic treatment to sick nations. But what we've learned, what we've suffered, is that your medicine often kills the patient." A truly damning indictment, don't you think? He continued, illustrating his point with vivid imagery. "Your loans arrive with smiles, but they are poisoned, arrows wrapped in contracts. You speak of stabilization, but you deliver strangulation. You speak of reform, but what you really mean is obedience to models built in foreign labs never meant for African soil." This is a profound analysis, suggesting that the IMF's policies, while ostensibly designed for development, are in fact instruments of control and exploitation. Captain Traoré firmly rejected the notion of Africa as an economic laboratory, stating, "But we are not your laboratory. We are not your experiments. We are not pawns in your economic chess game. Burkina Faso and the whole of Africa is waking up, and when we wake, we do not ask for permission to breathe." This powerful metaphor of awakening speaks volumes about a continent asserting its autonomy. Captain Traoré emphasized that his address was not a plea for debt cancellation or relief. Instead, he came to deliver a message that he believes no African leader has dared to say loudly enough. We no longer accept economic policies that reduce our people to beggars. While our gold binds the vaults of the West, we no longer dance to the rhythm of conditionalities that gut our public services, our farmers, and force our youth into exile. We no longer accept being told that good governance means handing over our national wealth to foreign firms with smiling consultants. This segment truly highlights the core of his message, a rejection of policies that have historically led to the impoverishment of African nations despite their vast natural resources. He announced a new kind of conversation, not one between debtor and lender, but one between equals, between nations, between truth and falsehood. And with a powerful flourish, he declared, "And this is not a press release, this is a reckoning, and it begins now." He then delved into a scathing analysis of debt, calling it a modern form of slavery. He stated, "Let us speak plainly without euphemism, without the polite lies of diplomacy, that the kind you offer Africa is not a tool of development. It is not a bridge to prosperity, it is a shackle. It is modern slavery dressed in suits and spreadsheets." He contrasted the IMF's terminology with the lived experience of Africans, saying, "You call it structural adjustment. We call it structural punishment. You label it financial discipline. We experience it as generational despair. You offer it as partnership. But when one partner profits while the other bleeds, it is not partnership, it is plunder." This reframing of economic terms from the African perspective is critical, highlighting the immense disparity in outcomes. Captain Traoré posed fundamental questions that challenge the prevailing narrative. How can a nation rich in gold, uranium, cobalt, and fertile land be poor? How can a continent that fuels the industries of the world not afford to feed its own children? He directly addressed the common Western accusation of mismanagement and corruption, acknowledging Africa's wounds, but asserting that many of those wounds were inflicted by the very hands now offering us band-aids soaked in interest. This implies a cycle of exploitation rather than genuine assistance. He then painted a grim picture of the real-life consequences of debt, far removed from the PowerPoint slides of financial institutions. He described children studying by candlelight due to privatized and collapsed power grids, hospitals lacking basic medicine because of austerity measures, and millions of graduates without jobs due to outsourced industries. He concluded this section with a poignant observation, and worst of all, it looks like dignity broken. Captain Traoré was particularly emphatic when discussing repayment plans, labeling them death sentences. He provided a stark example. You lend us $500 million and ask for $2 billion in return over decades through interest restructuring fees, currency controls, and privatization clauses that rob us of our national assets. He then questioned the moral justification, challenging the notion of willing consent in such asymmetrical power dynamics. He argued, is it consent when the patient is bleeding, and you are the only one holding medicine with a price tag and a clause? Is it choice when the gun is not pointed at your head, but at the starving child behind you? This powerful analogy transforms the debate from a purely economic one to a deeply moral one. He declared, this is not consent. It is economic coercion. This is not development, it is domination. This is not globalization. It is neocolonialism in financial ropes. His assertion, Africa does not owe you, you owe Africa, is a revolutionary statement, flipping the script on historical narratives of aid and debt. He called for justice, not charity, demanding an audit of what is owed, where it came from and who truly benefited, and the right to chart their own financial futures as equals. Moving to the second key point, Captain Traoré sharply criticized how the IMF undermines African sovereignty. He lamented that independence without autonomy is illusion, directly implicating institutions like the IMF. He stated, you do not govern us, yet you draft our budgets. You do not vote in our elections, yet your approval determines whether our economies collapse or breathe. This highlights a significant power imbalance, suggesting that external financial bodies exert more control over African nations than their own citizens. He candidly referred to this influence as political engineering, where behind your technical language lies a silent weapon, conditionality. He described how seemingly polite recommendations to cut subsidies, liberalize your markets, devalue your currency become mandates when starvation is the price of refusal. This vividly illustrates the coercive nature of these recommendations. He continued to lay bare the perceived failures of structural adjustment programs. We were told structural adjustment would create efficiency. Instead, it created dependency. We were told austerity would eliminate corruption. Instead, it eliminated hope. We were told the free market would lift us. Instead, it lifted our wealth and flew it offshore. He accused the IMF of shirking responsibility when protests erupt, claiming to be merely observers, but asserted, history is watching, your hands are not clean. He cited examples from across Africa where leaders are forced to privatize water only for foreign companies to raise prices beyond reach, and farmers undercut by cheap imports that kill local industries. He concluded this section with a potent challenge. What is more radical than forcing a country to choose between feeding its people and repaying loans it never benefited from? He stated firmly, your influence has too often been a veto on our dreams. You have become unelected governors of African policy. However, he ended this point with a defiant promise of rising sovereignty. We will be sovereign, even if it means rejecting your loans, even if it means slower growth, but growth that is ours, even if it means pain for now but freedom in the long run. Africa does not need masters. It needs partners. And if you cannot walk with us as equals, then step aside because we are moving forward. And this time the strings are being cut. A powerful metaphor indeed, signaling a complete break from traditional power dynamics. In his third critical point, Captain Traoré argued that the entire global system is designed to fail us. He asserted that the current global order, forged in the fires of empire, left behind frameworks built to extract, not empower. He highlighted the paradox of a continent rich in resources still struggling with poverty. Why is it that we, the continent with 60% of the world's arable land, still import food? Why do we, who sit at top gold, diamonds, oil and lithium, need foreign aid? He attributed this not to chance but to design, stating, "Because the game was never fair. We were made exporters of raw materials, not builders of industries. We were assigned roles in the global economy, like actors in a tragic play." He described the penalties for any deviation from this assigned role. Credit agencies downgrade ratings. Multinational lobbies threaten sanctions. Tech giants pull out investments and their media calls us unstable. He questioned the very notion of a meritocracy in such a rigged system. They say work harder. They say be more transparent. They say attract investment. But what they don't say is this: the scoreboard was rigged from the beginning. The rules were never neutral, and the referees, the WTO, the World Bank, the IMF serve the same teams who have always won. He provided compelling examples of hypocrisy, such as African nations being told to cut agricultural subsidies, while the US and Europe spend hundreds of billions on their own farmers every year and call it protection. He emphasized that Africa is not seeking pity, but fairness, not charity, justice, not handouts, equal footing. He concluded this section by declaring, "We are not broken, the system is." He called for a rewriting of the rules, asserting, "We did not come this far just to survive. We came to thrive, and we will no longer wait for permission to do so." Captain Traoré then transitioned to a vision of sovereignty through self-reliance, emphasizing that Africa doesn't need saviors or conditional loans. He outlined 5 core principles for this new path. First, feed ourselves first, highlighting that no nation is truly sovereign if it cannot feed its people. He called for investment in agriculture, not just for survival, but as a pillar of power. Second, educate to liberate. He profoundly stated that the most dangerous weapon colonialism left behind was not the gun, it was the syllabus. He urged a rewriting of education to empower children to know their worth, who build with purpose, who innovate with pride. Third, process to prosper. He exposed the injustice where raw materials leave Africa, finished products return 10 times the price. He called for local processing, manufacturing and innovation, stating, "It is not enough to own the mines. We must own the means to refine, package and profit." His fourth principle was unite or perish, recognizing that a fragmented Africa is a weak Africa. He called for economic, political and technological integration, urging existing African organizations to evolve into engines of collective action. Finally and powerfully, he urged, "Trust our people." He lamented that leaders often trust foreign advice over local wisdom, and stressed that the solutions are here in the hands of our youth, our women, our elders. He concluded this transformative section by stating, "We are not building a copy of the West. We are building Africa, our Africa." He acknowledged that self-reliance might mean stumbling and mistakes, but asserted, "There is no savior coming. The savior is already here in our hands, our hearts, our unity." He declared, "Africa will not rise through speeches alone. It will rise through soil-stained hands, ink-stained books and steel-stained factories." In a direct address to my beloved people, Captain Traoré powerfully stated, "You are not powerless." He challenged the notion that power belongs only to those in high offices, asserting, "Real power does not start at the top, it starts at the bottom, it starts with you." He recognized the everyday heroes, the farmer, the mother, the street cleaner, as the foundation and pulse of Africa. He identified a tragedy in the mindset of waiting for change from others, and urged the tearing down of this invisible wall between leaders and people, because True leadership does not rule, it serves. He revealed why the system prefers you powerless. These international institutions rely on your silence. They thrive when you are too exhausted to resist, when you are taught that politics is dirty and not your concern. He directly linked everyday struggles to political decisions, asserting that by not engaging, we become complicit in our own oppression. But he instilled hope, declaring that once the people awaken, the tide shifts. He highlighted the power of collective action, from a young person registering to vote to neighbors fixing a road, emphasizing that revolution is not always a fiery explosion. Sometimes it is quiet. He then outlined 5 sacred rights for the people. The right to question, the right to organize, the right to information, the right to refuse, and the right to dream. He urged the youth, you are not the leaders of tomorrow. You are the fire of today. Do not wait for permission. Start now, speak now, organize now, build now. He called on elders to offer wisdom and mothers to recognize their strength as the backbone of every revolution. His message to every African listening was clear. This is our shared mandate to demand truth, to reject fear, to build a continent that finally honors the dignity of its people. Power is not something given. It is something realized. And today you must realize you are not powerless. In his final profound segment, A Reckoning That Fears Your Awakening, Captain Traoré articulated that the battle is not one of guns, but a battle of narratives, control, and fear. He asserted that institutions like the IMF and World Bank are not afraid of our armies. They are afraid of our awakening because an awakened African is a dangerous thing. He exposed the long-standing narrative that Africa was the problem, and how we began to believe them ourselves. He passionately reminded Africans of their rich history, of Timbuktu and ancient kingdoms, stating, "We were not poor, we were made poor." He concluded with a powerful revelation of what they fear most. Their power depends on your ignorance, their comfort depends on your silence, their wealth depends on your exploitation. So when you begin to read, they panic. When you organize, they tremble. When you unify across borders, they conspire. He declared an unstoppable generation of Africans who know the game, who see beyond the aid packages and death traps, who refuse to sell their futures for short-term illusions. He asserted, they fear not your rage, but your clarity. They fear not your weapons, but your wisdom. They fear not your protest, but your purpose. He stated unequivocally, the awakening has begun, a spiritual, ancestral, and prophetic shift. He linked the continent's poverty directly to external extraction. For years they have extracted from us with impunity, and yet we remain the poorest continent in the world. No, this is not chance. It is by design. He proclaimed that this reckoning is not about revenge, it is about justice, it is about restoration, it is about dignity. He added, it is about telling the world, we are your creditors, and it's time to settle the account. Captain Traoré emphasized that the shift cannot be reversed, for once people see the bars of their cage, they no longer mistake it for freedom. He warned of pushback, propaganda, and threats, but urged that their fear is not your signal to retreat. It is your confirmation. You're doing something right. He declared, this is your time. Africa, this is your moment. You don't need permission, you need purpose. You don't need saviors, you need strategy. You don't need pity, you need power. He issued a direct message to African leaders, foreign investors, and African youth. To the youth, he stated, you are the architects of a continent reborn. Your weapon is your mind, your shield is your history, your compass is your conscience, and your mission to reclaim, rebuild, and restore the African soul. He called for a new covenant with the people, ensuring that leaders serve contracts, do not sell the future, and flags truly represent a thriving populace. Captain Traoré ended his address with a soaring call to action and a spiritual affirmation. This moment, this reckoning is not about me. It is about a spiritual awakening, an ancestral uprising, a generational fire that cannot be extinguished by fear or foreign hands. He proclaimed, Africa is not waiting to be saved. Africa is rising to save itself. He declared, "We are awake, and we are coming for everything that was stolen." He urged, "Africa, remember who you are. You are the drumbeat of the earth. You are the sun before time. You are the womb of humanity. You are the whisper of the ancestors. You are the roar of tomorrow." And with a final resounding declaration, he concluded, "Africa shall rise, Africa shall heal, Africa shall reign not in conquest, but in conscience, not in revenge, but in restoration, not by force, but by the unstoppable power of a people who have remembered their name. May the ancestors watch with pride, may the children walk with hope, and may the world bear witness to the rebirth of a continent, so help us God." What a truly historic and galvanizing speech, my listeners. Captain Traoré has articulated a vision for Africa that is bold, self-reliant, and rooted in justice. His words are not just for Burkina Faso, but for every nation on the continent, and indeed, for anyone who believes in true equity and sovereignty in our global community. This reckoning, as he calls it, is a narrative shift that could redefine Africa's place in the world. We will continue to follow the unfolding story of this awakening on Sweet Story. Stay tuned.